Hey guys, it's Chris from DS6 Machina, and I just saw Matrix Resurrections. I don't usually do video reviews on this channel anymore. I used to, but I don't. I did a comment, a very relatively controversial and popular video on Alien Covenant, but people know I created an Alien RPG, and I'm very passionate about the Alien franchise, and I did a video, Ghost in the Shell, which I really liked, and I wanted to post it because I also, once again, did a Ghost in the Shell RPG, so I felt there was a connection there. So here I'm talking about Matrix Resurrections, but you're probably thinking, I didn't do a Matrix RPG. Well, I didn't, but I was going to. In fact, the before I founded DS6 Machina, I was running a homepage, a homebrew homepage called Sirena Dawn Spaceport, which up until recently was still online. Went down because of a lapsed renewal of the website, and now it's owned by somebody else. And as it was never generating any revenue, I decided to let it just go after nearly 25 years of being online. And it had stuff like my Amethyst game before it took it off, and I published it officially. I had a Ghost in the Shell D20, and I also had an Alien RPG. But before I decided to go legit and publish Amethyst, which was my original setting, uh, you know, to actually generate revenue, which started my career, I was going to develop a Matrix RPG. Actually, I had two projects. I had a Matrix RPG and a Futurama RPG. The Futurama one didn't get much leverage. I was going to basically make it as a bunch of races that you can pick. I was going to have like 100 races, but I decided I was going to do the Matrix one, so much so that I put it as an advertisement coming soon, and it was up there for a while before I finally said to people, like, unfortunately, this is not going to happen, and it's too bad. And I know that I would never be approached. And I'm happy with the people who have done Blade Runner and Alien RPGs. I think those people are very talented and very experienced. I would have loved the opportunity to do a Matrix RPG. The biggest issue I always have with both of these is that if I'm designing it, I want to be able to have my own creative input in some fashion. I don't want to say, like, I don't want someone to tell me, this is never, you can only use stuff that's been pre-designed and pre-created. You cannot contribute to this mythos in any way. And I would be like, no, I want to add to it, not change, add, expand on that setting. Because in a lot of situations, when you move from a film or a TV show onto a game, you need to expand the setting because there's not enough meat on the bones to create a good setting for an RPG. So on to Matrix Resurrections, and this was very interesting because I actually like the Matrix trilogy, original Matrix trilogy. I actually did like Reloaded and Revolutions. I Obviously, the original Matrix was groundbreaking, and that's the reason why these sequels just couldn't measure up. But some people will hate the other two films, and I don't. I like Reloaded. Actually, I love Reloaded. I love what they were doing with Reloaded. Revolutions had good moments. I actually liked the Siege of Zion, but it wasn't as strong a film. So that was always something. I wouldn't say stained the franchise, but it was shocking that they never wanted to go back to it. They made the Matrix Online, which for a lot of people was kind of a sequel, and some people considered it canon, considering that the Wachowskis were involved in that production. And that's where it ended when the Matrix Online went offline. There was Online went offline. That was basically it until we got to Resurrections. So what do I think of Resurrections? I'm still kind of on the fence. I appreciate what they decided to do by taking this meta approach. I don't want to go into spoilers, obviously, but I really appreciated it as an artist myself, as a writer. The idea of blurring the reality of your creation is really dear to me because it's something that I kind of fall into when I'm creating my worlds. I do sometimes kind of envelop myself almost to a fault. I think it's the best acting Keanu Reeves has ever done. There's never a point where I felt that he was wooden. I thought this is actually one of his strongest performances. There was a little hamminess, but it falls in line with his character, and I was surprised in how well he fit into it. Even with the long hair, he didn't look like John Wick. It felt like he became Neo again, and I really appreciated that arc, and I like the fact that they brought Trinity into this capacity and how they dealt with her story. In fact, some people have said they hated it. They hated the first act. And I know someone who I know of someone that walked out within the first act, and I was just like, the first act for me was the part I fell in love with the most. It added so many interesting ideas. I felt the problem was that once it became more traditional, that's when I started to have issues with it. there's a point in the story where it has to become more traditional. Well, it doesn't have to, but he made the choice to make it a more traditional Matrix film with, with the idea of bullet time and escaping from the system, going to and showing the world outside the Matrix. And I felt that it had this great meta approach, this narrative that I appreciated, and the fact that for a good chunk of this first act, as you saw in the trailer, the character of Neo is unsure about what's real and what's not, which that's not a spoiler. That's quite literally the basis of the first film. So the fact that they tapped on that again, but they gave it a modern twist, I thought was really fascinating. As an action film, unfortunately, I think that's where I wouldn't say it fails, but it's weakest element. There aren't any surprises action-wise. Fortunately, if you've seen the trailer, you've seen all the action beats. That's what I loved about the first Matrix film, is that you saw the film, saw the trailer, and it didn't show you anything. You had no idea that there was a kung fu element to it. And here, the action's cut a bit too close. It's a bit too rapid. That's one thing I appreciate about the three original trilogy, that they were wide. They allowed these long cuts, showed martial arts the way they should be, and feel like in this one, we were too involved in having a more gritty Matrix, and rather than I hate to kind of say the cleanness, the fact that when you had an action scene you could see everything and understand everything. But in this story, it felt like there was a lot of sequences where it was a bit more choppy than I would have liked. So unfortunately, I felt that the original trilogy had better action. In some ways, I actually felt the original trilogy might have looked better. It had a crispness, a cleanness that I felt this new film lacked. There were some good action set pieces. There was some humor. I liked the characters, and I liked where the story went. Everyone that got introduced I thought was good. The way the villain got introduced was very interesting, and I liked how it turned out. There's a character played by Jonathan Groff, I love him as an actor. Obviously, a lot of people know him from Hamilton, but if you have not seen this HBO show that he's done called Mindhunter, you gotta absolutely see it. It's a fantastic show, and he's absolutely amazing in it. And he has a role in this film that you begin to understand who he is, but I don't understand why he is, why he's there, why he's doing what he's doing. He kind of moves in and out. He's not even central to the story, really. So I thought that was really shocking, and I didn't really understand the motivation to include him both in the story and externally as a writer. Why did we need that character in the story? I felt that you could have spent more time developing the characters, developing this mythos without having to include his character. But everyone else I thought was really good. It was also, strangely enough, a Sense8 reunion. If people know Sense8, it's the TV show the Wachowskis did with J. Michael Straczynski. It's a very, very good show. Fantastically well written. It is a slow boil, so it's a hard show to get into because it's a slow boil, but it starts to really pay off going into season 2. And four actors from that show are in. It's not one, it's not two. It's 4 actors. In fact, there's this ship, the new ship in this setting, and half the crew are from Sense8, which I thought was hilarious. I was watching, going, I know this guy. What do I know this from? And then I realized, these people are all from Sense8. That's why they're recognizable, which I thought was kind of cute. There's a character played by Jessica Henwick. I thought she kind of owned the film. I felt that we should have focused her as being the main character. But, we wanted to put, once again, Neo and Trinity front and center. And I thought that also was a mistake. I felt that this was an opportunity to pass it off to a new generation rather than saying, they're back up front, they're ready to go. And I'm like, yeah, they're ready to go. They're both nearing 60 years old. And as this film was presented very obviously, they are not spring chickens anymore. And now I'm at a situation where, like, you could have had new young people who are physically fit that can handle the fight scenes. Like I said, and all of this new cast are fantastic. I think when they're fighting, it's a much better film than when Keanu and Carrie-Anne Moss are doing it, which is unfortunate because I actually love them both as actors. And so I felt it was really good. I think I'm definitely leaning it more in the 7 than the 8. And I think if I see it again, I might enjoy it more. I may, my wife will probably want to watch it. She'll probably rewatch the original trilogy before we watch the new one. What would I have done as a writer? Because obviously I love this story a lot. If someone said to me, "How about you do? What would you do for a Matrix?" I think what I would do is I would pass the baton rather than bring these characters back from the dead, resurrections, and make them front and center. I would create a story where to stave off the second coming of Neo, or actually in this case the seventh. Now, people, this is not a spoiler because this is part of the original series. That there's a revelation at the end of Reloaded where they find out that Neo wasn't the first one. In fact, he is the sixth one, and that it's not 200 years in the future, but probably 500 or 600 years in the future, because they have circulated this loop of destroying Zion and rebuilding Zion. And the machines have gotten used to it, but it's still an anomaly that they wish they didn't have to do. So I kind of like the idea of them resurrecting Neo and keeping him in this fugue state in order to prevent a new one that'll create this cycle and create a new anomaly that'll have issues. So I thought it would be interesting if there was a new one who can't wake up because the other Neo exists. And it would be interesting to have created a story where the old Neo has to make room for a new Neo. And I don't mean a new Neo as in a young Keanu Reeves, like a new actor, a new young actor bringing this and now realizing that he has to step up. And then Keanu Reeves, his character, can step back and no longer be the one and step aside for the new generation. That's kind of how I would have played with it instead of rehashing. I didn't mind the nostalgia, but my issue with the nostalgia about The Matrix is that The Matrix is only 22 years old. I don't think it's really earned enough for nostalgia. It's okay with Ghostbusters. It was in the 80s, right? So there was that nostalgia. I don't think The Matrix has earned that nostalgic element to it. So I felt that I liked the meta narrative. I didn't really need the nostalgic reminders or the rebooting of ideas. As I'm talking about this, I feel like I'm convincing myself to push it to a 6, but I think it's still going to stay a 7. But this brings up some other ideas I had. Other elements of I've been kind of critical. Other elements I've liked. I've mentioned the introduction. Visual effects are very convincing. We don't have a lot of bullet time. There are some really interesting choices with certain characters. There's some interesting bullet time elements to it. Oddly enough, I felt that the look of the world outside the Matrix was stronger. I felt there was more texture, more imagination. I felt that it was just interesting. The ships looked more interesting. I loved the robotic effects that we've had. I thought that was really cool. I felt, oddly enough, that they had this X amount of money and they spent more of it on the visual effects of the world outside the Matrix than spending it on the Matrix itself, which I thought was very interesting. I don't know what the film was rated, but I felt it was less. I don't think it was a rated R movie. If it was, I don't think it was rated R in Canada. I don't think it really got past it because I think they only said one F-bomb. And I felt the violence wasn't as extreme as some of the earlier ones. And also, unlike Matrix 2, there wasn't any nudity at all in this one. I felt, like I said, there were some really good actors, some good visual effects. But now I want to talk about how it connects to, and I was trying to vent it and talk about me, but the reason why I'm posting it here is I'm talking about me developing this RPG. Now, I decided to kind of abandon it when I decided to do Amethyst, but I was also steering away from it when The Matrix Online came out because I felt The Matrix Online was going to take that thunder. Nowadays, I knew it wouldn't. There would have been a demand for both. And like today, I'm surprised we still don't have a Matrix RPG. I will bet you that somebody is trying to make that happen. And I think the biggest hurdle is going to be trying to expand this universe in a way that makes sense. I liked what the Matrix Online did. I felt some people have felt that Matrix Resurrection was going to pay off and canonize the Matrix Online. It would explain what happened that was important, and the important thing being the fates of certain characters, which were explained off in Matrix Online. But in the Matrix Online, the idea is that there's now a treaty, but there's now 3 affiliations. You can work for the Merovingian, you can work for Zion, or you can work for the machines. And there's a treaty, but there's a lot of infighting and a lot of conflict, which was what the Matrix Online was. And I think That's a good idea for a game. I wouldn't have done it as a movie or as a TV show. I think Matrix actually lends itself as a successor to turn it into a TV show, and I think it's interesting that HBO Max, if they had made Matrix Resurrections and someone had asked me, yeah, I would have said, let's go to HBO Max and pitch a TV series with new people and follow their adventures and expand on that universe rather than just recreating another movie, how popular that might be. Because when I was designing this RPG, I was thinking about running the campaign. How would I run the campaign? Obviously, we're not going to include, we're not going to have Trinity and Neo because in Revolutions, they've both been killed. So the story would pick up 5 to 10 years after, and there would be this tenuous alliance, and there would be story points that would emerge that the characters would interact with. And the first one was what I mentioned earlier about the possibility of this cycle relooping. Now that Neo is dead, potentially there's a search for the next one. They might have been born, they could be 5 or 6 or 7 years old by this point, hunting down and finding this person before the machines try to take this person and control it in such a way that they can prevent the next rise of the one, which could cause problems with their quote-unquote alliance or their push. That's one element I wanted to play with. I also played with an element which is something that I'm surprised they haven't played with in regards to the setting, and a lot of things we see with a lot of video games as well, and when they convert them to movies. Ready Player One has this issue. Free Guy has this issue. I love these movies, especially Free Guy. Great movie. But it has this issue, the fact that their worlds are too small. So they create this video game. They say it's with both Ready Player One and Free Guy, the video game that's central to the story is the most popular video game in the world. And I don't think they realize how the scale of the world is, because if you were the most successful game in the world, you would have 60, 70 million active players. The Oasis probably would have 1 billion people online. Now, in our modern age, that's impossible. You can't run a server with 1 billion active players. It would just be madness. So they run, even with World of Warcraft at its peak, would have not one world. There was actually about 1,000 worlds, if not more. And they would have anywhere from a couple dozen to a couple hundred people on the server at any one time, because they could never sustain 1 billion people on a single server, let alone 1 million or even a couple 100,000. So there's a scene at the end of Ready Player One where you say everyone in the Oasis has showed up, and you see this gigantic army, and you look at it and going, that looks like a couple thousand people. That's not anyone who plays the Oasis. Like, why isn't there 1 billion people in that crowd? Why aren't they crashing the server? Let's assume this is Magic Tech and they have servers that can handle 1 billion people in the same location at once. Where are they? And the same thing with Free Guy. Free Guy is the most popular game in the world. Why are there only 25 NPCs? Why are there not 1 million NPCs? Where are the 1 billion or so active players, and yet we only see a handful of players? Where is the scale of this world? And of course, the answer it would be, of course, there would be 1,000 versions of that video game. And that's how I would play with it. If I was doing a sequel to Free Guy, I would be like, oh, by the way, did you know that there's 1,000 other Free Guys out there, and only one has awoken because only one of those servers had this character this player that would unlock this person's memories. Not going into spoilers in that one, but and that would be like, what you guys are missing this one critical aspect of video games. And when you translate that to the Matrix, then the idea, like in Matrix 1, if you read the script, the idea was that the Matrix was the entire world. That you could travel to Hong Kong in the Matrix. Now, oddly enough, in Resurrections, when we got to Reloaded and Revolutions, they kind of scaled it down to the point that it was just one city. It was tens of millions of people in this one city, but that one city was the Matrix. And they almost confirmed that by Revolutions. By the time we get to Resurrections, interestingly enough, they've swung back to this idea in the original script, because in Matrix Resurrections, they're in San Francisco, where in all the other stories, they never say the city. And at one point, they go to Tokyo, or to go to Japan. and they're basically declaring that there is, of course, this could be a new matrix, so they have custom designed it to mimic the entire planet. But in the original trilogy, it was one city. So, and they say tens of millions of people. I go, is that it? Is that all that's left of humanity? And that's entirely possible. It is post-apocalyptic. Could there be another matrix? Could there be a dozen servers scattered across the planet, each with 20 or 30 million people connected to it? Could there be a dozen different Neos and a dozen different Zions? And that was the idea that I was going to flesh out in the RPG. That was the big kind of twist. We would start off with certain smaller crises and slowly pick up information from other characters and so forth, aware of the fact. And then the players at one point would encounter this digital tunnel. It looks like an underground freeway, but it's a digital Easter egg, effectively, that was built in by somebody that the architect doesn't know about, that connects this matrix to another matrix. That's, we're assuming that this matrix is in North America. There's another matrix, for example, in Europe or in Asia, and which could explain why potentially in the first matrix you didn't actually see a lot of Asian people. Maybe it's because this is North America and there's, this predominantly is a certain type of genetic pot, but maybe the matrix in Asia has almost entirely Asian people, people of Japanese and Chinese and Thai descent, and they're living in their matrix. And that was kind of the concept. And so at one point the characters have this action scene when they're traveling through this seemingly endless underground freeway tunnel, and they emerge and they find another matrix. And they're like, oh, it's another city. And someone says, that's not another city. This is another matrix. And they find out that as we explore and expand this universe, that there's actually about a dozen matrices, each of them a little different. There's a different, their populations are a little different. Some are larger, some are smaller. Their ethnic mixes are going to be a little different. Maybe the cities will look a little different, but also some of them might have solved their anomaly. They don't have a Zion. They don't have a Neo. Maybe in the same way of our modern world, maybe these machines aren't getting along. There's a scarcity of resources potentially. As a result, they don't have a good relationship with the other matrices. There's a matrix that we know, and there's another matrix that you can call gamma or beta or delta or omicron, and you can go to the delta matrix, and the delta matrix doesn't have a Neo, but those machines don't share that knowledge because they are rivals to the alpha matrix that we know of. And there could be another matrix where there's a Zion, but there's been peace there for centuries, and there has been collaboration, and they don't enslave their humans as much. But maybe it's a smaller matrix, but it's also incredibly unpopular, and they have issues as well because they go into conflict with these other ones. And there could be a totalitarian, militaristic, large machine world that has found some way to work around. Also, potentially, we also mentioned that there were earlier variations of the Matrix that don't exist anymore. That's where these exiles come from, areas that were horror, supernatural, and that's where werewolves and vampires popped up because these characters show up in Reloaded. And the Merovingian is an artifact from that earlier version. And it'd be fascinating the fact that some of these matrices are actually running older versions. And so characters move into like Ravenloft, and they move into these other matrices that are representing other worlds and other time periods. Or potentially that, as it turns out, the Alpha Matrix has deepened its code in its lower layer. They're keeping that server operational in minimum power. There's no people in it. They're not using it for power plant, but there are still some people are keeping that PAL light on. Like maybe the Merovingian keeps that online to bring characters out to enter the Alpha Matrix. So maybe the characters go into that and they discover that some of these other rival matrices haven't moved past this. They're still in that form, and so characters get to move and expand and travel to different matrices, encountering potentially another Neo or another type of one, and then potentially realize that some of these machine societies are absolutely at war with each other. Now, if you've seen Resurrection, I'm not going to spoil anything, but of all the things I mentioned, there's a slight inclination that that may be true. They never say anything about different matrices, but the idea, the fact that the machines aren't entirely getting along, that's something that we see in Revolutions and Reloaded, because the Oracle is on the side of mankind and she's a machine, and then the Architect is all about running the Matrix. And obviously we see machines like this, like the agents, that dislike humanity. So we know that there's going to be conflict between the machines, and the idea of taking that to the nth degree, I thought, is very fascinating. So in my campaign, it would involve initially characters that would discover the older versions of the Matrix still running, the pilot programs, but then that would expand to them discovering another Matrix. Like I said, there was probably 2 or 3 years worth of gaming potentially in this, and I would have had the players over the course of the story discover this, right? And there were other ideas I was wanting to flesh out. One idea, for example, and this was kind of inspired by what happened in Revolutions, the fact that Agent Smith turns into this virus that possesses other people connected to the Matrix, including other programs and people, to the point that by the end of it, everybody is basically turned into Smith. And once again, we see a situation where we see all the Smiths, and it's the entire population of the Matrix, and yet when you look at from on high, there's not a lot of people, and that kind of encourages the idea that there are multiple servers. But Smith has his ability of possessing other programs, and at one point he possesses a person that's disconnected, and then when they disconnect from the Matrix, Smith downloads into that person's mind, and we get that character who's actually entered the real world. So I thought, well, maybe the machines, when they terminate Smith at the end of Revolution, when they send the purge code and they wipe him out, they got access to that code. So maybe this Alpha Matrix has something that nobody else has, this capacity of being able to take a program mind, a sentient artificial mind, and send it to and possess an organic body. And that would give them a way of entering the real world without having the squids or the other non-human machines. And I would actually have that in the story, but it wouldn't be a negative. So the idea, the fact that as part of this alliance, that there would be people that get killed in the Matrix. They're put on life support, and when they get disconnected, they download a sentient program, and then this sentient program is able to talk on a human level to the other humans of Zion. It would be very controversial, because people are like, wait a second, this is a program walking around a human body like a puppet. How would this, that's not right. Are they going to just possess us now and run us? Are they just going to send programs and possess everybody and make them all mindless slaves so we don't have to keep them alive? How does that work? And then this treaty kind of prevents them from doing that, and there's ethical reasons that people like the Oracle will stop. But in order to create this alliance, the people of Zion kind of allow a small number of their dead to be used as vessels for machine diplomats. And one of the characters would be somebody who was once a friend of a player, but now they have to, when you see that face, it's actually an AI that's controlling that body. And I would make that a playable character. I would say the fact that you could actually, as a race selection in this game, you could select one of these very unique individuals that can exit the Matrix in a flesh body, but they're actually synthetic. Now, Resurrections, it doesn't play off of this, doesn't include this idea at all, but it does have something else that I thought was equally as interesting and fascinating. And if I would run the game now, I'd be like, oh, I want to include all of those ideas. Now, Resurrections doesn't say that the idea, I think Resurrections doesn't say, no, there's only one Matrix. I still like the idea of multiple Matrixes. And so if Resurrections is successful and they're going to do another one, I'd be like, this is a great opportunity. Have a story where they discover another Matrix, a rival Matrix, because you've laid foundation. You can create this idea. There is so much potential. But I think the first thing they need to do, they need to kind of detach it from Neo and Trinity. They have to accept that for the franchise to move on, you have to bring other characters to the foreground. It can't just be Captain Kirk. It can't just be Luke Skywalker. If you want this franchise to survive, you've got to bring new characters front and center. And that's where kind of Resurrection fails, because it had a potential of a lot of new characters, but then it kept on focusing on these other two. But that's the way I was going to run my game. And the reason why I'm sharing all this now, obviously, is because I'm not going to develop a Matrix RPG unless I can buy the IP, and that's not going to happen. And the chances on someone ever asking me, hey, you want to run Matrix RPG? And I know just recently I sent out an update for Ultramodern, which gave you guys elements of Dune. It was very small, it was like 3 or 4 pages. It gave you a couple monster templates, a new equipment, and so forth. But beyond that, it was very simple. I could not do that with the Matrix, because the Matrix, there's just too much. There's just too much. I'd have to create the vehicles, sentinels, create monsters. It's like 20 or 30 pages. So for me, I'm less interested in that. If I had the free time and I felt that there was an economic advantage for that, maybe I would do it. And if somebody asked me, I would totally. It would be hard for me to negotiate a pay, because I would want to do a Matrix RPG so badly, on the condition that I include these ideas. I would bring in Resurrections lore, I would bring in online lore, and then some of my own ideas without altering what's been canonized already. But I think that's kind of how I would do it. I would play off of this as so much rich texture within the Matrix that there's that I would include in an RPG. But yeah, that was my review for Matrix Resurrection, and talking about my this one time where I almost made a Matrix RPG. If you have a chance to see the movie, see it. If you have HBO Max, see it online. But I think, if you have a chance to see it in Dolby Atmos, go ahead. It's not in 3D. But I think it's a good movie. Give it a shot. Anyway, this has been Chris from Deus Ex Machina.